It could be a new trend in attacking animal rights, stripping of the grassroots power of local activism. It's happening in Utah, and it could roll back some hard-fought victories. That's next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, some of the biggest animal rights victories in the nation start at the grassroots level, like the banning of carriage horses, unanimously approved in Salt Lake City. It's still a fight in other cities like New York, but in Salt Lake, they've banned it, but maybe not for long. Legislators in Utah are trying to Bigfoot the locals by passing a law that gives the state the power to override local measures. It's a terrible idea, and if it passes in the Utah State House, it could be spread as a strategy throughout the country. Amy Meyer is a manager of primate experimentation campaigns for PETA. She talked to me about how a bill, if passed, could undo the end of carriage horses in Salt Lake City, and another bill that would undo the recent victory over factory farming at Smithfield. They're strategies that, if successful in Utah, could easily be seen in your area next. My conversation with Amy Meyer on the PETA Podcast. So, Amy, thank you for being here on the PETA Podcast. This is important legislation because for grassroots activists, this is the slap in the face if to this kind of legislation that they're proposing in Utah. So tell me about how bad it is. What is it, first of all?
Yeah, so that's right. So this is, it's called Senate Bill 113. And what this bill would do would make it so that local communities, cities, and counties can't enact or enforce their own ordinances that basically would make it so that an animal enterprise could operate. So, for example, the thing that, really hit me personally hard with this one is that it would make it so that the horse-drawn carriage ban that we got passed through grassroots organizing and with PETA's support back in 2013 here in Salt Lake City, it would make it so the city could no longer enforce that ordinance because that ordinance makes it so this animal enterprise, horse-drawn carriages, can't operate in our city. So if this state level ban on that happens, it means that these horse-drawn carriages could come back to our city and our city has no power to stop them. So it's an issue of the state taking over power from the local communities here in Utah.
Now, how can they do that? I mean, or can they? I guess they can do that. They can say those local laws are, not what we want statewide, and we're going to impose the statewide, or rather a statewide sentiment to make those local folks get in line. Is that how people are seeing it?
Yeah, that's absolutely what's happening here. It's, frankly, a lot of Utah is a very rural state, and some of the people who represent those parts of the rural state are themselves profiting off of animal exploitation. They are farmers, they're ranchers, they're alfalfa farmers that feed the dairy industry, all these kinds of things. And so we often do every year, our legislative session here is only 45 days. They cram a lot into those 45 days, and we often do see bad bills for animals. But, this is taking it a step further, saying you can't pass any good things for animals. And even on a local level, it's, grassroots activists in Salt Lake aren't, working in their town of 2,000 people trying to stop a horse-drawn carriage. Like we're saying, our city council here voted unanimously to ban horse-drawn carriages because not only is it cruel, we've documented these horses collapsing from the heat stress and dying on the pavement. But it's just dangerous for everyone when you put horses in the middle of a city, just like we've seen in New York City. These accidents are really serious and they happen. And so what we're simply trying to say is you can't do a one-size-fits-all approach and try to make it so that you can just just make it so that these local communities don't have power. I think it's really going against the heart of the values of a lot of these people who are in the legislature. They're just making this weird exemption because it's animal issues, and they shouldn't be. It's going against their values of putting, power in local control.
It sounds like it's not necessarily a partisan issue, but it was passed in Salt Lake City, this anti-carriage horse law. Is it more partisan, or is it just a matter of the state wanting to retain power over local authority?
Well, it's interesting, and it's a little hard to know for sure, but I was able to go to a committee meeting that they had on this bill last week, a week ago. And at that committee meeting, the sponsor of this bill basically explained why he's bringing it. And part of what he said is that he doesn't want Utah to lose some of its heritage. And he mentioned these bunny chases that happen in his town. And for people who aren't familiar, last year, and I think in previous years too, but I know last year, local activists as well as PETA were pressuring the mayor of this town to not let this Easter event happen, where these adults just put these rabbits in a field, hold them there until they tell these children go, and then they let go of the rabbits, and the rabbits are either frozen in fear because there's all these people making a huge commotion around them, or they are terrified and running. And all that happens is these kids just try to tackle these bunnies.
Really?
And there's video of it. These kids are just throwing themselves onto the rabbits. It's a competition to try to catch the rabbits. And it's just horrifying. These are prey animals. They are horrified. And of course, this is very likely to end in injury for these rabbits who have delicate bodies. When kids are just slamming their body down on them, it's just cruel. And so the person who's introducing this bill said, we don't want anyone to stop our bunny chases, which is that's the level we're talking about of decency to animals that some of these people have, to be honest.
Well, just wait till one of their kids get hurt in the bunny chase.
Yeah, that's right. It could be hurtful for the kids too. And it's just not teaching kids the right values about how we should treat animals. I mean, there's so many opportunities to do good things for bunnies around Easter, right? It's really completely unnecessary. But I think that's part of why this specific person in the Senate is introducing this. He was upset about, us going after his precious bunny chases.
You have all these different interests, but the bottom line, under the general rubric of stopping animal enterprise, it gets in the way of some good things that have been done over the last few years to help the animals and to protect them.
And this isn't a one-off case, I actually think this is part of a bigger pattern we're seeing in this country. I noticed recently Missouri now has a state bill where they are trying to say cities can't ban the decline of cats, because St. Louis did that. St. Louis banned the decline of cats. And so now Missouri is saying, hey, no, you can't even do that. And I'm a Wyoming girl. I'm from Wyoming. And I just read last week, there's a bill there saying local communities can't ban rodeos, which honestly, it's not happening anytime soon in Wyoming, but I think they're trying to get ahead of the curve. They see the momentum the animal rights movement is gaining. And so they're trying to use their political power to squash us before we can get the bigger victories of getting regulations changed for animals.
Yeah. And I noticed because you wrote an excellent piece in the Salt Lake City Tribune that the Salt Lake City Council, that was a 7-0 vote to ban horse-drawn carriages. I mean, that was unanimous. So it's not like people don't want these laws, but some people will want to pass these general statewide laws to really negate all the good that's happening at the local level.
And honestly, you read these bills and they're not well thought out at all. Actually, at that same committee meeting discussing this bill, it was brought to their attention that the way it's written could actually impact dog walkers. Under the rules, a dog walker could be an animal enterprise. And so there's all these weird ways that I think it's going to have they don't even know what's going to happen if they pass some of these bills. I think it'll end up having a lot of weird litigation trying to figure out what's an animal enterprise and what isn't. But yeah, it would overturn essentially our horse-drawn carriage ban. It would also make it so we can't do good progress like has been done in other cities to ban circuses using animal wax, or to ban using certain kinds of torture devices in rodeos. So this bill could also impact things like circuses. It would make it so we couldn't ban circus acts with animals from coming to certain cities, or even probably banning certain torture devices used in circuses or in rodeos that, they can't operate without using, like has been done in other cities across the country. So, this is an example of these legislators, I'm sure under political pressure. The Utah Farm Bureau has been very supportive of this kind of bill, and in the past as well. And they're just seeing the progress animal rights movements making across the country and trying to make it so that we can't have those same things in our communities here in Utah.
Well, how about the people who are against carriage horses in Salt Lake? I mean, aren't they up in arms, and would they have to go now to the state level and do a bill to ban carriage horses?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even though the city has this ban still on the books, it's unenforceable if this law passes. So if we wanted to try to ban horse-drawn carriages, yes, it would have to be at the state level, which I will tell you is so hard to get anything done at the state level. It's just like any part of government. The higher you go, the harder it is to get things done. And the Utah legislature only meets for 45 days out of the year. So they're not even in session for the vast majority of the year. So even if we wanted a state ban, we'd have to wait almost a year to even see if we could get it on the table. And then by that point, they're just going through hundreds of bills in this short amount of time because it's such a quick window that it's very hard to get them to prioritize issues concerning animals in a positive way.
This is all under SB 113, how it could affect all these laws. But how could it affect, there's so much progress that has been done in Utah. The first ag-gag laws were done in Utah. Those are mostly state level, right? Not local, right?
Yeah. So in the state, and I was, as maybe I was the person who was charged under Utah's ag-gag law back in 2012. And, eventually we were able to overturn that with PETA's help, of course. And so that's not on the books anymore. So I don't think this would impact things like that, since that law isn't on the books anymore. But it's honestly just really hard to know for me exactly where they're thinking and all the things that they would want to be doing with this law, and, the kind of precedent it could set for other things they want to do down the road.
So what is the strategy to try to defeat SB 113? Because it sounds like it's one of those insidious things that once it gets done, who knows what else it could stop. I mean, or it forces people at the local level, if you want to do something in your neck of the woods in Utah, it forces people to go up to the state level, which, as you point out, is not impossible, but they've raised the bar quite a bit.
That's right. Yeah. So our local group, Utah Animal Rights Coalition, we've been trying to at least spread the word to local voters to make sure they know about this issue, because it's hard to even know about all the bad bills happening, to be honest. There's so much going on at the legislature in Utah in these quick 45 days. So what we've been doing is really just encouraging our members and supporters, and we encourage PETA's members and supporters too, to be calling their representatives and their senators. SB 113 right now is still in the Senate. So next it will be going to a vote in the Senate. So we're encouraging everyone to call their senator and urge them to vote no on SB 113. And then, of course, it's worth calling your representative too, because if the Senate passes it, it will quickly go over to the House of Representatives for their vote too. So, it makes it very easy. If you Google online, you can see who your representative and senator are, pulls up their phone number, give them a text, give them a call, email, do everything you can to tell them that, you're their constituent and you don't want them to be voting on this.
Now, we're talking specifically about Utah, though, now.
Yeah.
And so
right.
Some people would say, oh, well, it's a fairly small segment of a small part of the United States. Or is it? Or how would this apply, or why would this be of concern to people nationwide, do you think?
one reason it should concern people nationwide is because we often see these start in the easy states. So it's just like ag gag. Ag gag started in where? Like Iowa, it starts in states that it's like, well, who really cares about Iowa or whatever the state is, Idaho, Utah. But as soon as one state starts getting these bad laws for animals, other states start taking their language. They start using that as precedents to pass their own bad bills. So even if it's a small state, even if it's a state that seems like maybe it doesn't matter, it really has huge repercussions. And, I would also mention that there's all kinds of, animal enterprises in this state. We have some of the largest factory farms in this state. We have some of the highest number of mink factory farms for the fur industry. Like there's so many animals who are impacted when bad bills for animals are passed here in Utah.
So when you talk about a bad bill, part of what makes this a bad bill is it's kind of vague. It's not really detailed in terms of what they're really after, but it includes any business that, quote, sells animals or animal products for profit. That's pretty broad. It sounds like if this law passes, they'd be passing a giant, I was going to say it could be a loophole for some, it could be a tight noose for others, but it's very vaguely written, it seems.
That's right. It really is. And a similar bill was actually introduced last year too, and it ultimately got squashed. A lot of people were speaking up against it. And the only thing that changed really this time is that they made an exception for pet stores. Pet stores are not considered an animal enterprise now because a lot of people last year were up in arms that we can't try to keep pet stores that are selling puppy mill puppies out of our communities. So they tried to appease some people by taking that out. But a lot of the same problems that people were raising last year about, all the types of businesses that could be animal enterprises, which, includes things like dog walkers, maybe even, or restaurants that serve meat. I mean, who knows what other terrible businesses could even crop up or start, calling themselves an animal enterprise and getting away with things because local communities can't enforce any rules about them. Yeah,
you talked about the legislator who was upset she didn't want to see the bunny chase be eliminated, or he didn't want to see the bunny chase eliminated. But why don't they just pass a statewide ordinance specific to the bunny chase? To keep the bunny chase. I mean, there are ways to do it without being so general.
I'm sure that a lot of it is because there are, lobbyists like the Utah Farm Bureau who is constantly afraid of what animal rights people are doing. And, there's actually another bad bill up there, HB 114, that is in direct response to a case that was litigated here in October, the Smithfield trial, which I know the PETA podcast talked about.
Yeah.
And so now the state is introducing a bill to try to make it so that people can't even use the kinds of defense that they used in that case if they're trying to make their case for why they should be proved innocent for rescuing sick and dying animals. And so I just think it's all because these people in power, the people making the laws, are hearing from lobbyists of these big and powerful industries. And frankly, they're not hearing from enough of the vast majority of compassionate people who want to be protecting animals and demanding more protection of animals from these people, not less. And so, I'm always encouraging everyone to be reaching out to whoever your elected officials are to make sure they know that people who are voting them and keeping them in power really care about animals and want to see them doing more to protect them and not less. They really need more protection on every level in every community.
So if a senator or a House member in Utah gets flooded with calls from people from other states, does it still matter to them, or do they ignore those calls?
To be honest, I think that they probably ignore those calls. They want to be hearing from the people who vote them in, the people who are going to be voting them for next year. But I'm not a lobbyist or anything like that. I just see bad things happening to animals and want to help. So, maybe I'm wrong there, but I think the most good we can do is really, focusing on the people who we're electing and pressuring them that way.
But then again, for people who aren't in Utah, it's important to just understand, like you were saying, that these little things start in states that people don't think about or care about, and then they balloon when the language of a law is borrowed and passed in another state. And then it just snowballs into one big ugly mess where it's all anti-animal legislation.
That's right. And I think, a big lesson here is that these animal abusing industries are always thinking one step ahead of how they're going to keep protecting their profits. And so it's up to the animal rights community to also be thinking one step ahead on how we're not going to let that happen in our states, in our communities, and in our countries. We are going to keep progress always moving forward and not backwards.
Well, tell me about, we talked about your involvement in the successful passage of the ag-gag law. Tell me how that's going, and tell me the importance of that and how it, the passage of that law, how it affected other states and the the protection of people's rights to see and know what's going on in these animal industries.
Yeah. So, the good news is that I had thought after we defeated the ag-gag law here in Utah that maybe the legislature would respond by trying to write a new version that maybe might stand a little bit, they could just try again and see if they get sued again or see if it becomes a problem for them again. And they haven't done that. They haven't tried to reintroduce things. I think they frankly saw that it's just not a good bill to pass, and that it's really hard to ever do something like it under the First Amendment. And there's been other states too that have been knocking these ag-gag laws out, and not as many getting reintroduced. So that doesn't seem to be the strategy among the factory farming industry anymore, from what I can tell. Often what I'm seeing now is factory farming industry almost wanting to try to pretend like they're showing you what's happening, and they've seen the backfire of when they're being secretive and not letting you see what's happening, how that makes people skeptical, and how people think maybe I need to see what's happening. Maybe I need to go to PETA's website and see what's happening to these animals. And so now they try to give this like false sense of transparency, which is honestly just grossly just inadequate at showing what's actually happening. It's like a fake transparency thing that they're almost trying to do now, from what I can tell.
And just for people who may not know everything about what the ag-gag laws were about and why they were important to stop and why they were important to just do away with, and why you put it on the line in 2012 to try to reverse the ag-gag laws. Just explain the importance of fighting those ag-gag laws.
Well, again, it's really just about kind of controlling the information that people get about what's happening to animals in our country and what was happening to, the so-called food that they're eating. These ag-gag laws that were making it so that it would be a crime to either to like trespass onto a slaughterhouse or into a factory farm, or to, in some states, like in Utah, it was a crime if you became an employee under false pretenses. So if you were like an undercover investigator from PETA, it would be committing a crime to be filming what's happening in these factory farms and sharing that with the world. And, it's such a threat to the First Amendment. It was wild. When I was charged under ag-gag, it was very interesting how many different, like all kinds of different people were really concerned about what was happening with these laws. Even people who didn't necessarily care about animals yet were like, wait a minute, what's happening? Like, you're not allowed to share this kind of stuff. These are, this is feeding our children. We need to know what's happening in these places. So that's really what and of course, it's so important that we know what is happening to these animals. And PETA's undercover work has been some of the most important work that the organization has done to really expose people, so we understand what's happening to these animals, the way that they are crammed into cages so small they can't even lift their wing and are surrounded in disease and having to sit in their own, urine and feces, and like that's then becoming the food we eat. Like, no, people want to be able to see that so they can make their own choices on if this is an industry that they're going to support or not.
Yeah, you've been able to fight the ag-gag law there in Utah. Other states are doing it as well, but there are still a number of states that still have them, right?
Yeah, there are still some states, and I know that it's still a battle trying to win those ones too. So hopefully, we're starting to set better precedent by, like the Utah one we were able to overturn, and some of these other states overturning it. So, I'm optimistic eventually the rest of them will topple too.
All right. So we talked first of all about SB 113, about the animal enterprises and how it could have a ripple effect on all good laws at the local level, because it makes everything at the state level. And you talked about we talked about the ag law. Any other legislation bits that you're encountering there that people should be aware of as well? This is a tactic that they're using, or this is something that the anti-animal rights folks are using against the animals.
The other bill right now that is facing Utah specifically is House Bill 114. And this is a bill that is in direct relation to the Smithfield trial that happened here in October, where two activists with Direct Action Everywhere were on trial because they had rescued two sick and dying piglets from a Smithfield pig factory farm during the case of their investigation. These piglets were not going to live. They were so sick and injured that they would have been worth absolutely nothing to the industry. And that was a lot of their defense in court, was saying, these animals, in order to burglarize a place and in order to engage in theft, you have to be taking something of value, property, which sadly is still what animals are considered in this country, but property has to have some kind of monetary value. And these sick and dying piglets had no value because they were sick and dying. And so because they won that case, that Smithfield case, though that jury of peers in southern Utah found that they agreed with them and that, they didn't commit this crime. The prosecution didn't present an effective argument proving that they had, committed this serious crime that could have put them in jail for 20 years. And so now in response to that, they are, I think the state is bitter that they lost that case, frankly. So now they have their friends up at the Hill introducing House Bill 114 that says that you can't, even if you're a defendant in a crime like this, a so-called crime like this, you can't even present evidence that you took a sick and dying animal. Like, you couldn't present the evidence that this was a sick and dying animal that you took out of a factory farm. So it's just, it's making one huge step forward. The Smithfield trial was a great success for this movement to really, say like that the people, random people, not animal rights people, a jury in southern Utah found that this was not theft. This was saving two dying piglets. And now the state's trying to say you can't even say that next time that they were sick and dying.
Well, that's pretty infuriating, that the piece of evidence that allowed the activists to go free, they're going to disallow it legally by legislation so that it negates the victory of the Smithfield case, essentially.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, those people are already, they've already won their case, and it's not like they would go to jail or anything, but it really is about trying to control for, a potential next time.
Right,
and
right.
It's really going to, it's actually, there's a member of the jury who's very upset by this because it's taking away, the power of the jury. Like, juries ought to be able to hear all the evidence in a case. And if you are being, if you're accused of a crime, you should be able to present all the evidence you have of your innocence. Taking away any of that is just really undemocratic altogether. And, luckily, like even one of the jurors in the case is now, calling these representatives up at the Hill. They had a great article in the Salt Lake Tribune as well about why they're opposed to it. But unfortunately, so far, that bill has already passed in the House and now is in the Senate. And so it could potentially pass altogether there pretty soon.
So now we're talking about the Utah legislature. I guess they have a hill there too.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. It is. It's on the top of a hill, literally. But yes, this is still in the Utah legislature.
So, but that's not to diminish it. It's important because it's a tactic. And if people understand the tactics that are being used in a state like Utah, and if it's successful, you'll start seeing it come to your neighborhood or your state or your town. And people are going to try to say, well, this is, quote unquote, best practices, legislative practices to fight animal rights. And so it's important to know these are the things that you can look forward to if it's successful in a state like Utah.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of some of the biggest or craziest ideas about how to handle animal rights people will be started in states like ours, where they don't think that there's, as strong of a animal rights community. But I think they've started to be surprised. I know a recent committee heard from hundreds of people, including a lot of PETA supporters here in Utah, trying to get them to oppose of these bills. And so I think they are starting to see, even in a state like ours, there's a lot of people who care a lot about animals. Well,
now you say even in a state like ours, yours, Utah, implying that, well, it's kind of conservative. It's kind of, it has its values. But don't you find that there's a real, say, bipartisan bent in terms when it comes to animals, that people can come together on animal issues most of the time?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely think that. I have a very memorable moment when I was up at the Utah legislature one year doing a tabling event. And at the time, I had a rescue dog, a rescue beagle named Ellie, who had been rescued from a laboratory, who had been used in really cruel and unnecessary experiments for the first 8 years of her life before she got to me. And I brought Ellie up to meet some of the Utah legislators and to talk about some of the issues of facing animals in Utah, but also talk about some of the issues with animal testing, which I'm very passionate about. And I had multiple members up there who said essentially the same thing. They said, this is something we can all agree on. Like, they would look at Ellie and say, everyone can see how important these dogs are, and how, these dogs are what can really bring us together. And just acknowledging that. And I think it's really true where there's they didn't want to talk to half the other tables there. They were only choosing which tables they could tell was their issue, but they all were like, wow, okay, here's an adorable dog. Everybody loves an adorable dog. And, I think everyone wants to protect at least some of these animals. We just got to get everyone to see that no matter if they're dogs or if they are monkeys or rats or cows, they all need protection. And so we're still working on that part. But it really has been a bipartisan issue. And we see that a lot here in this state.
Well, I hope you get to the bipartisanship of SB 113, that anti-animal enterprise bill that they're trying to pass there. And I just wish you the best, Amy. I know that you are such an activist. You're not going to let this happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're certainly doing our best. And, no matter what they throw at us, no matter what we throw at us next, we have to just always keep going and keep advocating for animals in any way we can. Even any hurdles they try to throw up at us, it's not going to stop us, right? We always have to keep moving.
Amy Meyer is manager of primate experimentation campaigns for PETA. On the move to defeat harmful anti-animal legislative tactics in Utah, refer to Utah SB 113 and Utah HB 114. Once again, negative strategies that tend to replicate in other states, so activists out there, beware. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or see my vlog at amok.com, or see my work at ALDEF, aldef.org/blog, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or see me at frigid.nyc, February 16th through March the 4th at Under St. Mark's Theater in New York City. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.